Hello, everyone. I'm with Michael Vannoy Adams, and Michael is a Jungian analyst based in New York City. He's a teacher, writer, speaker, painter, and photographer. He is clinical associate professor at the New York University Postdoctoral Program in Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis. So welcome back, Michael. We're doing part two of
Thank you, John.
talk. Michael, Michael, so maybe you can recap a little, because last time we were speaking about the importance of free thinking, free expression, free association in the beginnings of psychoanalysis, how that came about. And today we're going on to, you know, what that might mean for a person. How do they take that out into the world or into the street today, and can they do that? And you know, what does it mean in the present environment? What does it mean for us? But I want to say one thing before we start.
Yes.
This is a little speech in itself. I remember hearing a story once from Marion Woodman when she was a young kid, and you know, you do the exercises at school, the painting or whatever. Anyway, she did her painting, and she just so happened she had the sky was green and the earth was blue or something like that. So it was all kind of different, you know. And the teacher told her off very strongly. And anyway, to cut a long story short, she was saying that for many, many, many years, she could never paint, you know, again for a long, long time. And I don't know, it just struck me, that story, because I think anyone who's been a bit introverted or suffered from shyness whenever they were young, you kind of learn that it's to allow oneself to speak, to express, to you know, to kind of tame that inner critic or that inner judge, to allow one out to express. And you know, just the last part of this is that if you are a particular kind of person, an introverted person, it's like you realize what such an important part it is for yourself to bring out your speech, to bring out your expression. And when I first went to therapy, I can remember maybe early on in analysis of having a very perverse, grotesque dream, you know, with sexual imagery and you name it. And then I was going to the session and I was thinking, I just don't want to talk about this. Because usually, you know, I knew what the first question was, you know, have you had any dreams lately or whatever. And my therapist was an older European, very classical Jungian lady. And, you know, and she, in the end, I did tell that dream, and it was always like, you know, well, that's very interesting. You know, that was the thing about therapy. Like, everything was interesting, no matter how perverse or grotesque or out of the ordinary. But it just strikes me that that's the beauty of a therapy, in the way that it creates that kind of place where you can speak about those deeper things that come in your dreams or your soul or whatever. And it creates an environment of depth.
So are you saying that you actually did feel you were able to express yourself freely in your analysis the first time?
Yes, well, early on, you know, in the sense that there's not that judgment, there's not that criticism, there's a space which is created. And in Jung's language, the number two personality, you know, those deepest things from the psyche, from the soul, which often come through dreams or whatever, but a space is created which actually just draws you out more to be able to talk about those things, which is in itself a great liberation, you know? using the word liberation loosely, maybe in one way, but
Well, we ended up last time, we were talking about, you raised a question, which is, if you are able to free associate in the analysis, in the analytic office, if you're able to express yourself freely, if you're able to think freely and speak freely in that particular space, that safe space, then can you, or under what circumstances would you, when you leave the office and go out into the street, would you feel okay or free about expressing yourself in external reality? And so the last time we spent a great deal of time on what free thought and free speech and free association meant in psychoanalysis and what purpose it served there. And one of the points I was emphasizing was, it seems to me the basis of free association classically in psychoanalysis is that if you don't do this, if you don't accomplish this, if you don't set up the conditions that allow this, and if the individual in analysis does not express himself or herself rather than be repressed, if expression doesn't triumph over repression in the analytic situation, then you will have on your hands neurosis or psychosis. And that this is the reason why Freud, that was his logic in the first place, that free association liberates you to think freely and to speak freely about what's in your internal world, rather than censoring yourself. It's not about somebody suppressing your thought. It's not like a prohibition from the outside. It's an inhibition that you have for one reason or another. And so psychoanalysis is about helping you, if you wish to, overcome your inhibitions so that you can express yourself freely. And what I was trying to say is that that seems to me to argue for the intrinsic value of expression or self-expression, expressivity, as if it's an existential right. I mean, they used to talk about it as a natural right in the political realm, but I would say it is an existential realm. It's the, one could say that if you're playing around with Sartre or somebody else who said existence, what essence is existence. I mean, he said existence precedes essence.
And Michael, I think with, to me, what I get from Hillman, for example, is that speech is the specific endowment of the human animal. For him, it's the numero uno.
Well, that's what you mentioned from the myth of analysis last time. And of course, the definition of the species is Homo sapiens. We're supposed to be wise or sapient. Right. And but a lot of people say that the thing that separates us from the other animals, the human animals from the other animals, or the humanimals from the other animals, is our capacity. We have a different qualitatively different ability to communicate, and that we have something, our language is different from the kind of thing you might put language in quotation marks for the other animals. They communicate too, but we have what we used to think anyway was a much, much more sophisticated way of communicating, and that was through speech. Yeah. So if you really restrict somebody else's speech, see, people want to say, we're going to restrict your speech because it doesn't meet our criteria or our standards.
Yeah.
And this argument for intrinsicality is not something about the utility of the speech. It's good speech, it's friendly speech, it's moral speech.
Because people are saying it's for the good of the community, for the good of the commune, that we need to suppress your particular speech
Well, now see,
because
now you're getting into what we talked about for doing in part two, which is moving out of the speech and psychoanalysis itself into speech in politics or into the external world. And you know,
can
as I said, yeah, go ahead.
well, it seems to me, right? I don't know. I'm putting it in just how I'm thinking about it now is like the therapy session is a kind of a mini prototype for me. It's the kind of thing of wow, that's set up how one can express oneself freely, you know, whatever. And of course, going into the world, it's a different situation because, especially at this moment, we have this cultish tribal situation where you either belong to the Democratic Party or you belong to the Republican Party, and they both have their party manifestos. And they're both kind of cultish in one way, if you ask me. So one walks out of the therapy room and one is seeking one's individual speech, but we're in that kind of tribal polarization. So what do we do about that?
Well, by 1930, the Soviet Union had effectively outlawed psychoanalysis. And I guess, I mean, my understanding of that or my impression of that is that during Stalinist Soviet Union, you wouldn't want to have any kind of space, any kind of safe space or any kind of private space where any citizen of the Soviet Union, well, like two people get together and speak freely about what they would think freely about this or that. Because, I mean, assuming it would be because you might be fearful or concerned that this might move outside. What might be a private thing in an office might come out that door and walk into the street, and then you might have a mess on your hands. And you might really then have to put down an insurgency because people would be speaking freely in a otherwise totalitarian state. So now we have a different, that's one time in psychoanalytic history. I can't tell you how much I admire the Russian Jungians and what they're doing, and I have very good contacts there. And so Sylvester Wojtkowski and others of us went over in 2011, and we had a wonderful conference there and a wonderful time, and we have great connections. And it seems to me they're working very hard to.
Where did you hold it in Siberia? Where they were presently
no, it's in Moscow. It was in Moscow in a university. A university was established by George H.W. Bush and Yeltsin for free thought. It was the first university of that kind created in the post-Soviet Union.
Right.
And so it was really a wonderful occasion. Henry Abramovich, the Jungian from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, I'm not sure. I know he's at Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
But we had a wonderful time there. But that's one story about the suppression of psychoanalysis, presumably because there was concern about the free expression of ideas in a society or in a state that might be perceived as a threat to their program.
Because it could catch on, and people could think they have the rights to free speech. And that could be very hard to hose down.
The current, I don't really want to get too much into the current political situation in America. I find it very unfortunate, the quality of the speech that people are voicing these days. I think they're playing with fire the way some people are talking. For one thing, the so-called rhetoric that's out there now seems to me extreme and violent and forms of character assassination that could actually lead to a real assassination. and I find this reprehensible and disgusting myself personally. And I don't care which side you're on or what your beliefs are. I just think this is courting disaster. So I have that kind of feeling about it. On the other hand, I don't like the idea that Hillary Clinton said that people should be criminally prosecuted. I think she said this yesterday. People should be criminally prosecuted who share propaganda. You see, she's taking it upon herself to define what somebody's speech is as propaganda. So people start using these words like propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. They invent all of this new vocabulary that gives them an excuse to suppress the speech of the other. Tim Walz, the Democratic vice presidential candidate, said yesterday or today, there's no guarantee in free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy. He's saying that how can somebody misread the First Amendment so badly? I mean, it's like some incredible incompetence. Either that or it's just willful misrepresentation of what is said. We have a guarantee of free speech here for misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, or whatever. The rest of the world doesn't have the same guarantee that the United States has, but the United States has, I would say, a relatively, I mean, I'm being joking now, but a relatively absolute guarantee of a right of free speech. It's relatively absolute. And there are grounds for it. One of the grounds is what is called, well, I would call it an extrinsic justification. This is the kind of thing that says you have a right to free speech because, as Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said, he's the guy who had fire in a crowd, false claims of fire in a crowded theater. And he was a kind of a poet as well and things like that. He was quite a figure, but he justified free speech in the political realm on the basis, it was not free speech for the sake of free speech. It was free speech in the service of some other purpose or objective. And it's an extrinsic objective. It's something that serves the society or the state. We would not allow speech to be so free if it didn't serve a utilitarian purpose, an extrinsic utilitarian purpose for the society or the state. Free speech is justified only because it contributes to that. And his famous thing, he picked up the sort of Adam Smith metaphor of the invisible hand in way, the free marketplace. You have a free market that is a marketplace of ideas. And you put all these ideas out there. You want people to voice their ideas. And in the clash of these ideas or the competition, the kind of capitalist competition of ideas in the marketplace.
Contest of ideas.
Yes, there's some kind of idea that the truth will out. The truth will emerge from that inevitably. Now, there are lots of things problematic about that. I'm not sure why the truth would emerge and so forth and so on, but that was how he argued the thing, and that the truth would promote democracy. See, so you've got a kind of a three-step thing there. The free expression of the things, but it's the free exchange, free expression for free exchange, and through that competition, the establishment of the truth, and then the truth is going to serve the democracy or the state or the society. And so that's why you have the right of free speech. But what we're talking about, you and I, is a kind of position that people who are legal scholars or constitutional scholars in America argue about. They have another criterion, which is an intrinsic justification. It just says people should be allowed to say whatever they want to say, even if it's nonsense, even if it's bullshit, even if it's ugly, even if it's whatever. You should have an enormous burden of proof on you if you are going to limit this fundamental, existential, instinctual, evolutionary proclivity of human beings.
And I think, Michael, considering all of that, but, again, just taking it to a more personal level is I think for some people that what's happened is, I remember growing up that some of the taboo around speech maybe came from the conservative side. That's where there was the pressure to speak in particular ways, or something could never be mentioned. But somewhere a shift has gone on. And it seems that the left is, in terms of what's politically correct, what can get someone cancelled. No, sometimes it seems to me the left is applying more pressure about what can be said. But what happens is the left is not always maybe owning up to that level of control or whatever. And so what happens is, for the kind of liberal person, they're a bit, hey, what's going on? Because, over on the left, the so-called progressives.
You mean like a mere liberal versus somebody for a progressive, or what do you mean?
Well, there's a difference. There's people like me that used to be on the left that are saying, hey, no, hang on, I'm maybe more classical liberal, really, whereas I'd rather be in the center there.
Yeah.
And the left, the so-called progressive left, they can be control freaks. I mean, they want to change the way you speak. I mean, that's, and there's a party line about language, there are kind of off-the-shelf phrases and slogans that one can get away with and call it conversation. And the right, which used to be the big ogre, sometimes you wonder who's the, and a lot of people are maybe caught in the middle. But there's some other question about, okay, going back to psychology, the psychoanalysis and the psychotherapy session, is that one's learned this model of free speech, free expression. And it seems to me that on that kind of level, you just want to bring a little bit more of your soul into the world. The speech of the soul, the number two personality, to find ways to bring a bit of, regardless of, meaning you meet should I say the word opposition, but whilst it might be a good environment or habitat in the therapy session, it's not necessarily when you walk out the door and go onto the street, because you'll meet tribes and cults and people that want you to speak a particular way. But it seems that the ongoing challenge is to be able to bring out more of that depth of the soul, that number two personality, in a way of your expression somehow, through writing or through talking, through painting. What do you say about all that?
Well, it's not something I've particularly thought about in quite that way before, but I'll try to improvise. What occurs to me is that for us to talk about internal reality and external reality, or the individual versus society and the state, or psychoanalysis versus psychoanalytic reality versus political reality, is itself a kind of dichotomous, binaristic simplification. And that really what you have there's not just one street out there, or one external reality, or there are multiple ones. There are all sorts of venues and circumstances and contexts and so forth and so on. And the trick, I think, would be, once you have allowed yourself, you freed yourself up to be expressive in and for and to yourself. If you want to go out on the street or with your wife or whatever the situation might be, then you want to be context sensitive. You want to think about, what's going to happen if I say that right now in this particular situation? You would become much more differentiated in how you think about expressing yourself, how you think about expressing yourself. I mean, whether to express yourself, and if so, how to do it. You get into what used to be called, the study of the great thing, the great science of all time, which was rhetoric, the art of persuasion. But I've been thinking about that the last day or two. I might rename it not just the art of persuasion, but just the art of expression. Your expression might or might not persuade somebody, but are you articulate? Are you eloquent? How do you think about your style of expression? I mean, do you talk this kind of language or that kind of language? You talk a very formal language or a casual language or slang or hip hop or what do you do? There's all sorts of stuff that one might do. And some people are really good at two or three of these things, and they're not inauthentic when they actually deliver in that style. They're not poseurs with that. They're really good at it, and they can swing this way or that way. And so I find what's being said and how it's being said for what kind of purpose in what kind of context. It seems to me, a much more sophisticated way of framing the question than just, would you feel free about talking this in public versus in private? That's a very important thing, the public and private thing. And I'm very glad that Jefferson and those people down in Philadelphia wrote a document and ratified it that has got some kind of very strong statement there, and that it's a written constitution. See, the problem we have is that in the rest of the world, in the United Nations or whatever, they may have some sort of similar wording in a document that they've come up with in the 20th century, but it doesn't have the same sense to it or the same application. It's not adhered to in the same way.
Yeah.
And you've got a thing going on in America now, which is that people have got some self-righteous attitude toward their vision of history. It's like teleology run amok, it seems to me. Jung was not he didn't have a prophetic function, he had a prospective function, and he says it's not teleological. He doesn't think that there is an end that's already decided and visible. This is more like Mr. Hegel, who has got the spirit of liberation or freedom moving through history. This is why Martin Luther King talks about, he's read Hegel and all those things. Martin Luther King read all of these people at Boston University. He's saying that the arc of history is bending in a certain direction. As a religious person or as a Christian, Martin Luther King Jr. was all in on salvationist or meliorist kind of thinking. And like the New Jerusalem is at the end of time. Yeah. There's some kind of triumphalism at the end of time. We're progressing toward that in some way, but it's already there as the end thing, the positive end thing. And some of the rest of us are not so sure about this. We don't think that the future is predetermined or predestined in that way. And so we're not Hegelians. We're not even Kingians in that way. I mean, I would say I'm a Kingian in lots of other ways, but in the idea that there is an inevitabilism. I wrote in one of my books about isms, and I said the worst ism of all is inevitabilism. Some kind of idea that this is, going to be the case no matter what in the end. And that what we do, the best we can do is to kind of accelerate that. So you've got a lot of people these days who believe that they know what God has in mind. I mean, they believe they know the mind of God into the future, and that they want to be on, as they say, on the right side of history. Now, I'm baffled by this. I just don't think it's so. It's just not so.
It seems to me sometimes even people, again, say a little bit on the left, wouldn't maybe associate with Christianity, but it's quite a Christian thing. It's where social activism has taken over on the values hierarchy over free speech. So that to get to this light at the end of the hill, then free speech has to be subdued.
Free speech is an obstacle to that, you see. Yeah. You have to silence anybody who says anything that might problematize the arc of history.
And get in the way of the progress that we require.
they would say slow down the inevitable, because they're all in a big hurry to bring about what they think is the inevitable. And I don't think anything is inevitable. And I'm very suspicious of people who imagine that they can read the future that way. I mean, I'm in a minority as far as I can see. I'm in a tiny, tiny minority.
Well, I've got an idea. We could start our own cult. There'll only be two of us.
Well, I'm proposing to start. I can announce that publicly here on the podcast. Let me dig it up in my notes here. It's a new organization that I am proposing to found. One second here. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to read a couple of little things if you don't mind here.
Yeah, go for it.
I propose to exploit the present opportunity to announce the formation of a new organization with a different name but identical initials. I mean, I'm referring to the International Association for Analytical Psychology, the Jungian International Organization, the IAAP. I propose to exploit the present opportunity to announce the formation of a new organization with a different name, but identical initials. It's going to be IAAP, but not the International Association for Analytical Psychology. This other IAAP is the International Association for Apolitical Psychoanalysis.
Wow.
There are no Jews.
I just find that dangerous. Do you mind me saying?
Well, the people accuse me of being a stand-up comedian or a sit-down comedian. I'm more sedentary. There are no Jews, there are no conferences, there are no members, or there's only one member, me, or I, the grammatically correct nominative case ego. This other IAAP exists only in the often facetious or satirical, occasionally sarcastic or cynical psyche of Jungian analyst Michael Vannoy Adams, MVA. There ought to be such an organization, for there's already an organization for politically active Jungians. It's Analysts and Activists, the AA, which recently announced a conference, Dreams, Memories, Activism, in celebration of the 10th anniversary of the organization.
Yeah.
The allusion to the title Memories, Dreams, Reflections implies, of course, that it's much better to be active than to be merely reflective.
Yeah.
Don't reflect, act.
But that's it's so very important, that point, isn't it? I mean, to me, that's the guts of what we're kind of been trying to get at.
Well, I will tell you, I have been kind of astonished. You've given me an opportunity here to really think carefully and seriously. I've spent many, many hours in the last few weeks reading and thinking about all of these things. And one of the things it's really dawned on me. I do belong to the New York University Postdoctoral Program in Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis. And I'm proud to be the only Jungian, except for Andrew Samuels, who is a foreign member. I'm the only local Jungian member of that. It's the largest psychoanalytic training program in the world. And Andrew and I are the only Jungians, or he would be the post-Jungian, I'd be the only Jungian in that NYU postdoc. And NYU postdoc is dominated by the paradigm of psychoanalysis that Stephen Mitchell spearheaded, which is the relational school. And the relational school it's radically changed the field. And one of the things that's happened, it's not intrapsychic anymore. They say it's a two-person psychology instead of a one-person psychology. In other words, in the old days, it's like, whose analysis is this anyway? And you would say, well, it's the individual's analysis. It's not the analyst. It's this other person there. This person's paying for it. It's an asymmetrical relationship. The individual in analysis has this kind of responsibility or this kind of role, and the analyst has this other one. The analyst is supposed to be neutral, not let his countertransference interfere with the analysis. He's not supposed to disclose a whole lot of things. He's supposed to be kind of careful in the way he interacts with the other person. Now it's much more dialectical. These people are partly, this really does have a lot to do with Hegel and the dialectic and a kind of a conversation and this sort of thing. And they feel free, much freer than the classical or traditional analyst to express themselves. I mean, they take it upon themselves to express themselves to their client. It's really not the client's.
What do you think about neutrality? I mean, you know, someone could say you're a bit old school. You know, they could say, well,
I am. I'm old school and true school. I mean, just because because something is new doesn't make it true.
no.
This is like the latest research. I mean, this is all crazy.
And you know, perhaps the political contamination of, I mean, if I'm going in as a therapist and pushing a political manifesto or propaganda, it seems like a very strange situation to me, or a very perhaps dangerous situation. That's been part of the you know, a cog in the machine of.
This is what I'm saying. We ought to probably have another conversation at some point about what I call psychomoralysis instead of psychoanalysis. Because I believe that what has happened here, I mean, you could call it ideology as well, but I really do believe that these people are very moralistic, and they've got again, this is why Nietzsche is so important historically in the philosophy of the West. Not because he said God is dead or anything like that in particular, although that's important as well, but I would say because he talks about going beyond good and evil. He's one of the first people who talks about going beyond binaristic or oppositional thinking and being more differentiated in the way you look at things, not just seeing the problem as this versus that, but as a more of a multiplicity than as a duality.
Yeah.
And so so he's saying that Middle Eastern religious complex, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, their emphasis on duality, God and the devil, or good and evil, or heaven and hell, or something rather like that, is a kind of mentality that we bought in some way, or that we converted to, or a lot of us converted to some centuries ago. And it's not that it's.
But there's a very important point about this, though, that, you know, maybe it's come up, or maybe it was when we were speaking before the podcast, is that there are many people that don't identify with being Christian. You know, this is Jung's point, isn't it? But there's still that Christian moralism. So, you know, we can talk about the fundamentalists.
This is what Jung calls the Deus absconditus. This is the hidden God. You know, they don't realize that they are still Christians in some sense.
Yeah.
They are still filtering things in the world through this paradigm, which is it separates, it's this versus that, and then it hierarchizes things. This is better than that. It makes the value judgment out of the opposition. It does this. And so I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
This is what's going on here. It's a cognitive, if you're into cognitive behavioral therapy, this is a cognitive rule that collectively the West has in its head. You know, and it's good and evil, or love and hate. It's like from the Spike Lee movie where the guy do the right thing, the guy has got love and hate on his hands.
Yeah.
Or it's like the old Robert Mitchum movie where they've got good and evil on the hands.
Yeah.
Tattooed on. And so Freud talked about love, hate, ambivalence, or good and evil ambivalence. These days, it's not, there's no ambivalence about it. People actually kind of love to hate people, and they want to impose their will on people.
Yeah.
It's like all of these people have read Adorno, and they've read the authoritarian personality, and they know about the F scale or the fascism scale, but they don't, they have now become that in some way. They think they are the opposite
Yeah.
of the authoritarians, but they have actually, in some funny way, become that.
It's
It's this,
like it's that thing of be careful when you're fighting the monster that you don't become like the monster yourself. And I saw something the other day which I like. Sharon Blackie, who I spoke to a while ago, said, "Enchantment is resistance." You know, uh,
what?
enchantment is resistance.
Okay.
It just appealed to me that uh, there is still room for that simple. I don't know. I would say this: that simple individual idea that what is it? The Zen ox herding pictures that one can do the simple things of life with, but everything's changed. One can there can be a transformative thing, but it's just the same. It's chop wood, carry water. So it's not that don't have to change the whole world. Don't have to impose the will on everyone.
Well, I would say one thing that I think is very important here. Over the years, I've been very interested in the word difference, or the concept difference. And this is partly because of my interest in Jacques Derrida and his différance, or a difference. He's somebody who um, conceptualizes that in a certain way philosophically. And then there's also Gregory Bateson in Steps to an Ecology of Mind, in that great book. He talks about a difference that actually makes a difference. And I found that's sort of like a distinction with a difference, but I like the way he puts it, a difference that actually makes a difference. So a number of people who are very important thinkers have taken up the question of difference, and James Hillman was one of them. And he says the most important project, this may even be in revisioning psychology, it may be very early on in his writings. He says the most important project facing psychology or psychoanalysis is something like the differentiation of the imagination. And so Jung defined individuation in two ways. One as uh, uh, whole, to become whole. It was a holistic approach to individuation, a definition along those lines, not being in parts, but becoming whole over time. But he had another definition as well, which competes with that one. It's not at all the same, and that is that you would become more differentiated over time. And James explicitly embraces that, and so do I. He and I had conversations about that, and so the ability to not be your neighbor's opponent or another citizen's opponent, or to be in opposition to them. Because when you get into that, then you want to eliminate your opponent.
Yeah.
See, that's what's going on now in the rhetoric and all that. They
Yeah.
really want to eliminate the other
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
bump them off, get rid of them,
Mm.
instead of discuss our differences.
Yeah.
And once you just move into differences, you already unburden yourself in a tremendous way. You take a lot of the heat off,
Yeah.
and you're in a much better position to have any kind of dialogue or conversation. You can't really have a dialogue if you are opposing the other person.
Yeah. That's so true. I think that's a good place to finish, Michael, and then we can continue this very fruitful conversation. But there's a lot a lot for me to think about there too. But there's so much good stuff. The only thing I want to say on closing is that whilst I am becoming more confident of expression, if anyone from Texas says anything, I just agree with it, mainly because I'm still scared of them from over there. But But
Well,
oh,
look,
well, I know
look,
you came from there originally, so that
I'm
was
not a
so.
long, tall Texan. I'm only Freud's height. I'm 5'7", so I'm not wearing a cowboy hat and boots today. And I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And all of my neighbors up here are not Texans. They're other ethnic groups up here, and this is my hood. I
Right.
love being between Riverside Park and West End Avenue on 98th Street.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be happier and prouder to be a New Yorker.
Yeah.
But I also love my Texan background, and I don't root for the Dallas Cowboys anymore, but I do root for the team that used to be the Dallas Texans, which is now the Kansas City Chiefs.
Right.
So anyway, I'm very happy that we had this conversation, and I
Yeah.
look forward
Thanks.
to the next one, John.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you, Michael.